we will now start the first panel with Rosie Robertson and Chris Folds from the Global Sustainability Institute of the Anglia-Ruskin University. I invite you on camera. And so Rosie, Chris, you have now led the Energy Shifts project for almost 2 years. Please share the key insights that you have learned from this project.
Thanks very much. And thanks very much also to, for the previous keynote. Really wonderful to lay the groundwork on what should hopefully be a really interesting set of discussions for these 2 sessions. So as already been mentioned, we'll be starting with some brief headline observations, I suppose, and experiences from ourselves as co-leads. But perhaps just I can introduce Rosie quickly, as I'll be kicking it off.
Hi, great to see everyone.
Thanks, Rosie. And so we'll be doing a bit of a double act, and really what we're trying to emphasize here are 5 key messages. And as has already been mentioned, this phrase of social science and humanities, which we put here in red as SSH, just because we'll be increasingly using it as a shorthand. So just to sort of note that. So I'll get going. I think Manon's really nicely mentioned about what Energy Shifts is, but just to sort of add to that, it's finishing at the end of July, and really I suppose the rationale for this, which has already been stated and perhaps isn't too much of a surprise of many of you as you've chosen to join us today, is that really there's a need for moving past a focus on technical and natural science-led solutions, which of course are important and play a really key role, but of course the role of incorporating understandings of society. And here on the slide there's some examples of different SSH disciplines and perspectives that could feed into that, and we include this here just really to emphasize the richness and breadth of SSH, and which is I think important because traditionally perhaps there's been a focus on understanding society as the economy, when SSH has been sometimes narrowly considered in the past. But as hopefully we're showing today by the fact that there's such appetite and so many people wanting to attend, and from our experience of the project, this is starting to change. The other thing that I'd just like to pick up on, other than to emphasize that we've really tried to, throughout this project, to get some tangible impacts and I suppose assistance to policy and practitioner communities, is to point to this set plan part of our title. So the set plan, the Strategic Energy Technology Plan, is really a sort of an EU policy instrument that guides a lot of research and innovation priorities in terms of investment, and leads into things like Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. And this has been something that we've been quite keen to engage with, and we're especially pleased that Hélène Crey, who is on behalf of the EC, the chair of the EU member states set plan steering group, is on our final panel and is offering some closing remarks. So great to sort of link that formally in terms of the set plan. So our five points. I suppose this first one links and dovetails really nicely to what was already mentioned, but just taking this from the first page of the Green Deal policy document here, to put people first. I mean, there's ideas of justice, inclusivity, active public participation, citizens from all different backgrounds, the role of industry and professionals. There's a lot of there and a lot of opportunities for SSH to engage. The other thing that I would like to really point to is this idea of sort of the urgent need for that integration as well. It was already mentioned about the 2030 target, which of course is completely right. But as well as that, from our experiences of leading the project, we've really sort of experienced some of the challenges of doing that integration, and sometimes it isn't quick to integrate SSH ideas, and so the sooner that we can do that, the better, particularly considering that a lot of SSH research lately has sort of argued that fast transitions are sort of hard to achieve, so the sooner we get moving, the better. And so my final one before I pass over to Rosie, we've often thought of ourselves as sort of sitting on the bridge, not necessarily acting as the bridge, as there's all sorts of bridging points, but sitting on the bridge between those that may use energy SSH research and those that will produce it, so perhaps between policy and research. And we've really been pleasantly surprised and quite excited by the level of appetite on both sides. And there was reference to this deliverable on connecting researchers to policymakers, which Rosie talks about in a moment. But there's also many other examples that show about how they're these fruitful bridges. So for instance, there's the set plan that I've mentioned, and we've had all sorts of interesting conversations with different working groups within that policy setup. There's the Green Deal, there's the commitment for mainstreaming SSH within Horizon Europe, and then also within H2020, and the dedicated commitment within the work programs for energy to have just funded projects on SSH, which isn't the norm across other work programs. And of course, at other events and other policy documents, it's quite obvious that there's an awful lot of desire to pull on SSH expertise. The other thing as well that I'll point to in terms of appetite on the researcher side, we've certainly found that through our exercises of engaging, for instance, almost 400 SSH researchers on our Horizon scanning, 86 associates, the researchers who've connected with these policy fellows, we've really been pleased that almost everyone we've invited has sort of said yes. They've been really keen to have these opportunities to connect with policymakers and those in industry. So that's been great to see. The other thing as well that I'll just point to, hence why I've got a couple of journal publication logos up there, is just to say that I think in general, so much of us as researchers, our research articles begin with sort of the rationale, the justification for existing, with it being timely, with there being important policy lessons that we can draw from our research. So I think implicitly there's clear appetite from the research community that there's material there. We just need more and more bridges to link across, and that's certainly been our experiences when we've tried to I suppose to facilitate some of these messages. I'll pass now to Rosie. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. So the third point, if we move on, is really around the very direct impacts that SSH can have on the ground immediately. And I'm just going to talk briefly about our two main tranches of work that we've been running during the project. And the first of these is our policy fellowships, which have been mentioned a few times. And this linked up 21 policy fellows who were spread across Europe. It's these small triangles on the map here, working both at national and local government level, but also in policy-facing organisations such as think tanks and NGOs and so forth. And it linked them directly for one-on-one dialogue with SSH researchers who we had matched because they had expertise of direct relevance to the policy challenges that the policy workers were facing. And the number of impacts that were apparent from these were really extensive. I've only got time to talk briefly about this, so I've pulled out one, which is quite an inspiring example that I find from the local energy manager working at the city of Niš in Serbia, Bojan Gajic, who joined the policy fellowship program because he was particularly interested in looking at how he could support energy efficiency renovations and retrofits in his city. And through the conversations that he had with social science and humanities researchers, one of the key discussion points was that potentially framing some of this program around tackling issues of energy poverty could be very powerful, and this might be something quite important to take forward in the work and in order to connect with stakeholders locally. And I feel this is a really important example because it really showcases how putting social aims at the centre of policy programs and initiatives can be very powerful and really make quite a difference. So this is just one example. Other examples, and Jean-Éric Paquet talked about specific tools. There was a lot of interest, for example, in the use of particular types of participatory processes, and there's obviously a lot of expertise developed within the social sciences and humanities about different participation processes that can be undertaken at local or national level. And this is something that there is huge interest in and was something that researchers were able to offer very directly. But the two main messages I wanted to say and really sort of to point towards this report, which came out from the policy fellowships, is that if you are a SSH researcher, you may be interested in looking at the impacts that were listed for each of these fellows, because it can really show what you can offer to policy workers papers if you're interested in starting that dialogue, and what they can take concretely from your work. And then if you are a policy worker, again, to echo what Chris has said, you know, there's such appetite for this, and there are so many researchers who are very keen to work to get social insights more embedded into policy programs. And really, this is an open door if you are interested. So those are my two takeaways for some of our audience here today. If we move on to the next slide, please, Chris. And then the second large tranche of work that we've been undertaking has been in order to ensure that SSH is really helping set research agendas. And we know that SSH research has been funded in energy for a while, but at the same time, it's also been the case that sometimes, for example, the calls and the priorities haven't always been written primarily by SSH communities. And in energy, it has historically been the case that perhaps more of the expert groups might have more technical expertise and less social science and humanities experts. And so our job in this project has also been to bring the SSH community together and to help showcase the diversity, we keep using that word, of SSH research, and that it can go beyond, for example, social acceptance type ideas, which obviously carry with them implications around solutions perhaps already having been decided upon, but moving more towards participatory and embedding SSH from the beginning of projects. This is really what we're always talking about, and getting them embedded within concepts and so forth. So this is the focus particularly of panel 2 in terms of our working groups, which worked with over 400 SSH academics to really help give evidence for these future SSH agendas. This report that's highlighted on the right is not one that we've produced. It's a report that the Commission produces in terms of SSH integration, and the integration across Horizon 2020 and 2018 was just published before Christmas. There we can see that 10% of the energy budget in 2018 did go to SSH partners, which I must say is an increase from previous years, which is great to see. But yes, we now need to make sure that SSH voices are also helping to showcase the diversity and breadth of what can be offered in across that. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, and my final point is really that this integration of social insights into energy projects and energy policy is not guaranteed. It takes work, and it takes continued work. And the risks of not doing this are quite large. We've already heard about some of the 2030 targets, which, as has been said, are just around the corner. There's also large 2050 targets associated with the Green Deal. And the risks of not incorporating social understandings mean it's unlikely we will meet these. And also, you know, if we do meet them, we may have very significant unintended consequences socially. It may not turn out to be a transition for all, which is what is aspired to. And it's very important that these societal understandings are embedded at the earliest stages. The two messages that we wanted to put forward in terms of next steps and what we've learned from our project and what we feel should be carried forward is to do with the important role of facilitation between policy and research. And this is something that obviously we have been able to do because we have been a funded project. And that comes to my second point, which is around institutional commitments to this. And that's commitments in terms of resource such as money and time, but it's also commitments to make sure that social solutions are given the visibility and placed centrally within policy programs. So if I move to the next slide, should just be a summary of the final of the 5 points, just so that people can see it. But yes, it's fantastic to have all of you here. We're so grateful for your time, and you know, enjoy the rest of the event. And thank you very much.
I just for my colleagues, I cannot seem to start the video, but I'll talk anyway. Thank you a lot, Rosie and Chris. for sharing these insights from the project. And I expect we're about to cover similar themes on the fact that it takes work, that it has real impacts, that there's real demands for better bridging between the two communities from our panel of what you call policy workers, which obviously include like policy makers, but also all the kind of the stakeholder, the crowd around them. So I invite Vincent, Lina, and Valborga to turn on their camera, although I would suggest we keep the mic off unless you're actually speaking. We'll first hear from Vincent Berruto. So Vincent, you've recently been appointed as the head of unit for innovation, clean technologies and competitiveness at DG Energy. And before that, you were the head of the energy unit at EASME, so another acronym, the European Commission's Executive Agency for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. So just to know that, just to flag that means you know about sustainable energy, you know about policy making, but you also know about the challenges of uptake. And I notice your camera is still off, so maybe if you hear me, yeah, okay. By way of introduction, Vincent, can you please tell us about kind of recent European energy policy developments that are particularly relevant in the context of today's event? And the camera is now on, but it's still black. Maybe your laptop is closed or something. In any way,
no, thank you. Good morning, Manon. No, the laptop is open, so the camera should be on. I don't know. I'm going to stop it and start it again to see whether that works. Yeah,
yes,
it was working this morning.
Thank you.
You can see me now. So thank you, Manon, for this introduction. Thank you also to Rosie and Chris for their very interesting presentation. I think good morning, everyone. Let me say, to introduce what I want to say is that I'm very delighted to be with you today. And I think that conference addresses a very important subject, which is receiving growing attention in the development of energy policies at European level. So what are these policy developments and how can social science and humanities, or SSH, support them? You know that in September last year, the Commission published its 2030 climate target plan, and it shows that to achieve climate neutrality in 2050, we must reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. And as Jean-Eric said, we need to go faster and we need to do things better. I don't have time to present all the policy initiatives that we have on the table today, but let me focus on three main essential aspects, which I think are relevant for today's conference. Energy efficiency first, renewable energies and system integration second, and third, research and innovation. So let's start with what we call the energy efficiency first principle. It means taking utmost account in energy planning and in policy and investment decisions of alternative cost-efficient energy efficiency measures. And most of these measures obviously have a clear social dimension. So concretely on the legislative side, in the Commission, we're planning to review this year the Energy Efficiency Directive as well as the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And both directives touch upon social aspects, such as, for instance, in the case of the Energy Efficiency Directive, the aspects on metering and billing, or for the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, all the provisions regarding energy performance certificates, which help owners and tenants assess the energy performance of their buildings. We also plan this year to further develop the legislation on products. And there again, if you take energy labeling, for instance, the role of SSH is obvious to help understand how energy labels influence purchasing decisions. At the same time, this year, in the field of energy efficiency, again, we propose targeted measures in all energy consuming sectors. For example, in October, the Commission adopted a renovation wave strategy to at least double the annual energy renovation rate of buildings by 2030 and to foster deep energy renovations. And of course, in that strategy, building owners and tenants are being addressed. As an example, the strategy proposes to strengthen information and incentives for renovation. I think there's a lot we can do with SSH when it comes to building renovation. Rosie was giving an example, and there are probably many others. Second priority, renewables and energy system integration. In our decarbonization scenario, by 2030, renewable energy is expected to reach close to 40% of gross final consumption. The share of renewable electricity production in particular is set to at least double to reach 65% or more. So the Commission is now working on a review of the Renewable Energy Directive. As you know, that directive plays an important role in engaging consumers in the energy transition, notably through energy communities. More generally, I think the Commission is proposing to break the silos, and that also goes very much along the line of what we're discussing today. The silos in which our energy system is currently organized. That means planning and operating our energy system as a whole across multiple energy carriers, infrastructures, consumption sectors, by creating stronger link between them and creating stronger link with consumers. And in that context, the Commission is proposing a greater direct electrification of all end-use sector, for instance, heat pumps for space heating, electric vehicles for transport, and that enables consumer to take a more active role and be offered new innovative services, for example, by contributing to the flexibility of the energy system and be remunerated for it. And many of these services will develop in the coming years, and we will need the knowledge of SSH to help that development. We will need also to exploit the potential of digitization and what it means in terms of consumer engagement. Which brings me to my third and last point, which is research and innovation. As Jean-Eric said, we know that without a major acceleration in the clean energy innovation, net zero emissions targets will not be reached. So we need technological innovation, but we also need social innovation. And without that, the EU will not be able to scale up in the markets that are expected to grow globally in the coming years. We need ambitious programs at EU level, at local level, and of course, particularly relevant is the Horizon Europe program for research and innovation. I may say a little more about that later on, but there's also another program which will be quite useful in using the results of SSH project, which is the LIFE program, where we will have a new component dedicated to market uptake of energy solutions. So that would be also interesting. If I have the opportunity, I would also say a little bit more in the panel. But to conclude now on that first question, Manon, I think the European Green Deal sets an ambitious goal of decarbonizing Europe by 2050. It is accompanied by a number of strategies and very concrete actions to make this happen. And in the field of energy, the strategies put a particular emphasis on energy efficiency, renewable system integration, research and innovation. And to succeed, what is evident is that we would need the mobilization of all the actors, including consumers, citizens. And this is why I think social knowledge is so important, so crucial, and that we have to use it more and more. And this is also why I think that the event today, which is addressing particularly that question, is so relevant. So I'm very delighted to be with you, and I'm looking forward to discussions in the panel. Thank you, Manon.
Thanks, Vincent, and yeah, delighted for that. And like I think you made a very clear case on the why we need to do it, and also highlighted like immediate opportunities to do better. Maybe briefly, could you share on like what kind of projects, what kind of energy related social sciences and humanities projects you've seen that you found particularly useful to inform policymaking?
Okay, well, that's interesting. We're bridging now between policy and research, and that's exactly what Chris was introducing earlier on. I think there've been many projects that we've been using in policy making. If I have to take an example, I would take the example of energy efficiency, which is the area where I worked the most. I think in Horizon 2020, we've supported close to 20 projects, I think, that amounted to nearly 30 million euro, and they were socio-economic projects that were very useful in designing but also implementing policy. Some of them have helped better understand the barriers to energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, you know, to reach the 2030 objectives, at least the ones that have been agreed now, are mostly facing non-technological barriers. And then so we want to understand that better. And so we had many projects doing this. We had many projects looking at the behavior of consumers. And these projects used multidisciplinary approaches and focused on segmentation of consumers. For example, and I remember a project called Penny, which has been quite successful. It found that limited knowledge of the cost of energy represents a significant barrier to households' adoption of new energy efficient solutions. Other projects looked at the macro and the micro economic effects of energy efficiency measures. They were quite interesting. Very interesting also were those advancing knowledge on the multiple impacts of energy efficiency. Meaning the impacts others than the reduction of energy and the reduction of cost, but also the increase in terms of productivity, on health, the impact on health, on comfort, and these were quite useful because we've had several of them, and they were interesting because they enabled us to change our narrative on energy efficiency, showing that the benefits are often greater than what people think.
Thanks.
Very useful also with sorry, just Manuel, just to finish, because there were another set of projects which I found very useful. They were the ones aiming at improving energy modeling. And for example, the projects which objective was to substantiate demand side aspects in modeling. And they are important because with more accurate models, we can have better projections and therefore better strategies and long-term roadmaps. And that also proved to be quite useful. You know that we're using modeling quite a lot in the Commission. So all these projects were useful. If people want to know more about them, I would suggest they contact the Executive Agency for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises for those projects dealing with the demand side. And if they're interested in socio-economic projects dealing with the supply side or the grid, they should contact the Innovation Network Executive Agency, which is managing these projects. And in both agencies, there are very competent people.
No, that's great. Thanks a lot. I now want to turn to another panelist. So this time from the institution that's officially directly representing the European people. So Lina Galvez Munoz. Actually, you are kind of the perfect person to bridge our communities, because as MEP, a member of the European Parliament, you was kind of vice chair of the leading committee for industry, research and energy, as well as a participant to the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. But beyond this, you're also an economic history and institution school professor with a lot of scientific publications to your name. So you're really perfect for this. I'd like to hear from you on what do you think we need to make the energy transition more about people rather than just technologies.
So thank you very much.
It's actually a little bit difficult to hear you. I don't know if it's a more question of focusing on the mic or having. It doesn't seem to be working. I'm sorry. If ever you had a microphone or headphones, I don't know if that could help. Try again. Still not working. Very sorry. I'm always a little bit at a loss about what to do in these situations. Okay. If you don't mind, then I'll probably move on to Valborga and then come back to you afterwards once we have a working. Okay. Okay, great. Then we will hear back from the European Parliament in a second, but so beyond like two policymakers, we've also I wanted to introduce our third panelist, who's kind of active in kind of shaping policy, but also offers a perspective from the real economy, the real world. So welcome Valborga Hemmertsberger. So you're CEO of Solar Power Europe, the association representing the European solar industry. And I wanted to ask you, to tell us about the kind of the social, the human face of the solar power expansion in Europe, which has been like pretty incredible this past decade.
Thanks very much, Manon, for having me, and thanks very much also to Chris and Rosie for the excellent presentation. I couldn't underline more what you have been saying, that there's a huge risk of not incorporating social understanding in order to reach the goals we've set ourselves in order to achieve the energy transition. What I've taken as well from you, Chris, was that we need to go faster in the transition. in terms of not having to go too fast at the end of it, so to spread it more evenly in order to reach social acceptance for the project we have to achieve. But let me say a few words on solar to get the discussion going. I would like to start with saying that solar is very much the energy of people, and that's why I'm so happy to be here today to discuss further with you. You can install solar on your own roof if you have one. You can put it on schools, you can put it on public authorities. So it's really something that people can own in the energy transition. It also makes you better off because solar today is very, very cost competitive. So what we see today is really electricity prices below the residential electricity tariffs. So it's also something where you can earn money. And that all makes that the public acceptance we see today is very high. So there has been a study, a European Social Survey in 2018, a few years back, but then still, which has shown that solar has the highest level of acceptance. It's in all countries approximately 80%. Some countries are standing out, like for example, Germany, a country where solar has been developed very, very intensely. 89% of Germans are favoring solar, 85% of Italians, 85% of French people say that solar was their preference, and 3 out of 4 Europeans support more action on solar. At the same time, I have to say that we're only at the beginning. So citizens from our perspective can play a much bigger role in the energy transition, a much more important role in a solar decade as we see it. And maybe Vincent, you just said that, you know, in your scenarios, you see renewable electricity playing a role in the energy transition as much as approximately 40%. Our own studies show that solar alone can be as high as 60% by 2050 of the energy consumption we have in Europe. So 60% of energy in general, not just speaking about electricity, but energy in general could be powered by solar. So that's quite something. And that can be much more owned going forward by citizens. We see the clean energy package as a very, very important milestone, helping to encourage prosumers. But rooftops, from our perspective, have to play a much bigger role in the energy transition going ahead. And there I would like also to quote another study from the European Commission, from the Joint Research Center, which says that rooftops could supply up to 25% of Europe's electricity demand, of today's electricity demand, which would be largely around 680 terawatt, where we consider, and also people from our sector consider, that is still a very conservative, but it's already a very impressive number. But we do think that also our sector still needs to do a lot, and especially when it comes to large-scale, utility-scale projects, because it's not just about rooftops. There's a great potential, you know, where you have this very direct link to citizens. But we do think that we also need big projects, utility-scale projects. And there, what we can see, and where we compare it, for example, to onshore wind, large-scale renewable projects in general needs quite some land. And we need to have acceptance from local communities for these projects for that reasons. So we are working as Solar Power Europe on a couple of things here. We need to encourage, for example, business models which combine, you know, the preservation and protection of local biodiversities with electricity production. For example, we're looking very much into agri-PV, as we call it, where you combine agriculture plus electricity production. You can use degraded lands, repurpose degraded lands, industrial sites, for example, and produce electricity on these sites by solar panels. What we also see more and more is projects where you combine energy production with where you involve very much local cities and communities and give local ownership to these projects. One example is one of our members has just installed floating solar panels in the south of France, Accour, where they directly gave benefits to the city of Biolang, and made them shareholder of the project. And the last example I would just like to mention is, because I'm very fond of it, in Lithuania, what they've come up with is digital platforms where citizens can participate financially in big scale projects, where you just buy a share on a digital platform of a big project, and they are very successful. So that's the development of electricity, the development of solar park, where you can have this engagement and much more than we've seen in the past. And just one last thing I think is very important to mention, and then I stop in order to give floor for more discussions. We also should not forget that there are citizens and that there are regions which will be not on the winning side in the energy transition. So that's, for example, coal regions, which have to transition to a new form of energy, but also industry, very industry-heavy regions. So I think we need to also acknowledge that and work a lot on reskilling and retraining programs. So solar in this case, just to give you our viewpoint, is also key for this transition, because solar is the most job intensive energy source. Solar installers, for example, in the US is the fastest growing job. And in Europe also, and again citing a study from the European Commission from the Joint Research Center, they have found that solar jobs are particularly suited for workers in transitioning regions. So it's very easy to reskill people from, for example, coal jobs into installer jobs, because there's a lot of skills which are similar and where some reskilling programs could help. So I would like to stop here. There's a lot more to say, but I'm happy to engage in discussions afterwards.
Thanks a lot. No, that was great, and it's very. I mean, we hear a lot about the kind of the energy citizen aspect of it, but I think we often forget about the large scale kind of challenges, and also like what you said about the transition not being like a win for all people in all sectors, and it's very interesting to kind of focus on that element as well. I see that Lina Galvez Munoz is back, and hi. Maybe we could try to come back to you with. No, I can't seem to hear you again. I think we may have to try the phone. I think it should be able, we should be able to do both the camera and the phone. At least that's what my colleagues tell me. So maybe while you connect, we had, while we connect for the sound. I think I'll just move on. We had asked a few of our policy fellows that we worked with during the project to come up with questions to our panelists, and I wanted to bring in Mrs. Katarzyna Dulko-Gazina, Sustainability Manager at IKEA, to kind of ask a question to our panel. And for this, like really any panelists can jump in, including Rosie and Chris. Not everyone has to talk, so please raise your hand if you want to comment on the question. Kasia, please ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm not sure if you can see me, but probably not. If I can do something still about that, no. Thanks for letting me asking the question. Actually, we are also at IKEA very much in love with solar, so it is very interesting to hear your presentation. And my question is, you actually mentioned also already about that, the green transition, how to make it actually effective and really transformational and affordable for really many people, and especially those with very thin wallets. What kind of tools and solutions do you see in the Green Deal in the next years in Europe, for example, to really make it effective? Because not everybody can afford a solar installation, of course, but the transition can be really fulfilled if we address, and maybe also with the help of the business. That would be also interesting for me to hear. How we can make this change exactly for those people with thin wallets. Thanks for that.
Who wants to start from our panel?
I can say a word if you want, Manu. We don't hear you anymore.
Sorry, I would say, go ahead now that you are muted, and I think Valborga also wanted to comment.
Oh, well, it's, I mean, on my side, I think it's a very, very good question. I think we don't have a one-size-fits-all solution. I think what we need are multifaceted approaches in terms of solutions, actors, sectors involved, including the private sectors. But generally speaking, if I look at the policy side, I think policies at all levels, local, regional, national, European, should encourage this. And at European level, for instance, the energy efficiency directive certainly helps. I think under the directive, the member states are required to take into account the need to alleviate energy poverty, for instance. And the member states, they must require a share of measures under their national energy efficiency obligation schemes to be implemented as a priority among the vulnerable households, including those who are affected by energy poverty. So that's one aspect and one way to act. The other one, I think, is through energy communities. I think they can play a very important role. I think Walberga will probably say more about that. But they have a social aim, and we've seen in many instances that they have the potential to help low-income households, vulnerable households consume energy more efficiently and use more renewables. And we've seen some of them developing new strands of activities in this area. For example, launching building renovation programs or training people on how to reduce energy consumption. I give you one example from what I remember from earlier projects that we were supporting at EASME. There was Enercop, for example, in France, which implemented a solidarity fund that raises money through small donations from energy bills of consumers, and also from produced energy donated by the renewables producers. And that money was used to support local initiatives tackling fuel poverty. Another example is in Belgium, in Ghent, another cooperative called Energhent, which works with a local charity that helps low-income households invest in energy performance measures, even if they don't own their dwelling. And the municipality gives subsidies to the tenants and the landlords to perform the energy performance upgrades. And it runs a one-stop shop where people get free information on how to improve energy performance and take other energy efficiency measures. And the cooperatives contributes to this initiative by lending services and lending expertise, sharing expertise. I think there are several examples like this one. What is clear is that any solution should be accompanied by accessible and tailored advice and training from trusted intermediaries on the behavioral changes that consumers need to make to reap the full benefits of the solutions. Because we can't only work on the renewable side, we also have to look at the behavioral change and energy efficiency measures. And this is where SSH, of course, can bring a lot.
Thanks, Vincent. Walberga, do you still want to do you want to comment on this question, or any other panelists?
Yeah, just maybe very quickly, because indeed, I mean, it is a very valid question, you know, how we could help also those citizens which maybe cannot afford to put solar panels on the roofs. I mean, just to say, solar panels in the last 10 years were reduced in price by 80%. So by now, this is not a huge investment anymore. At the same time, I acknowledge that, you know, poorer families would not be able to make that initial investment. The beauty of it is that it is paying off very quickly. So after, I mean, depending where you are and how much solar irradiation you have, it's paying off after 5-7 years, and solar panels last for 25-30 years. And your electricity bill is anyway reduced from day one. But I acknowledge that it is important that for some citizens it is necessary to get some support when it comes to the initial investment. And I'm not talking about subsidies, although that is also one thing which obviously helps. But there's more and more innovative business models out there, where, you know, someone is financing your solar panel on the roof, gets part of the benefits, but you profit from day one, basically from reduced electricity, from a reduced electricity price, not having to make that initial investment. And there's more and more of these business models out there, so that obviously can help. And if these business models are also incentivized, that would help a great deal. And something I would like to underline in this regard as well is what Vincent also said, that obviously energy efficiency also is very important in this regard. But also there, I could imagine that there are business models helping to become more energy efficient.
Thanks a lot. And I see now Lina is connected by phone, so we can try again. Like the question I put to you, but now, I mean, feel free to comment on any topics we've topic. But the question I had put to you was basically, what do we need to make the energy transition about people rather than just about technologies? And I think your perspective as an economic history professor and an MEP would be very interesting. I think you may, yeah, that looks great. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, but it doesn't seem to be. But I don't know if like you can maybe try closer to the phone or.
Could you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Now finally, wow. The problem here is the European Parliament suite doesn't work, so I have to use my own personal devices, and apparently there is a problem with the sounds. I'm really sorry about that, because I'm really very glad to be here in this panel, because, well, as you say, there's something in order to make social the Green Deal and to be close to citizenship. We are the representatives of the citizens, but also because as you say, I'm coming from academia. I have some responsibilities both at university level and policy making level on universities and research. I'm coming myself for humanities and social sciences, and I have been always trying to make clear that we have also a lot to say on knowledge and creation, and also for informing, obviously, policy making. So I'm really very glad. I think the key is just to answer very quick to what you were saying, is that we really need that the social aspect to be a goal. I mean, we really need to say we want that, and to follow that. And for following that, we really need to monitor and to include social scoreboards, social indicators, in order to follow that what we are saying is we are trying to do it. Because I don't know, for instance, in macroeconomic policies nowadays, today, all environmental indicators are very well developed, but the social indicators are well developed, but are not included in the main papers. So we really need to make sure that happens, and also obviously we need as well diversity on participation, on creating this knowledge, creating this cosmovision, creating these ideas, and also in decision making. And this is not yet the case. We need, of course, multidisciplinarity, because what we are dealing with is very complex. And for complexity, it's no one science, no one discipline that can have an answer. And of course, and as other panelists have said, especially Jean-Henri Paquet has said, we need to communicate the citizenship, because we really need the citizenship participation. I know that a lot of effort has been done in this respect, but I think we need more and more, because at the end, all these programs are supported by taxes paid by citizens. So let me treat all of these aspects very quickly with a transversal issue which I've worked a lot and is very close to my heart, which is gender. And I will try to do this well. But probably the first thing we have to have in mind is that technology is a tool, but it's not a goal in itself, and it will depend which technology we developed and how we use it. And it is very, very, very different. And energy transition, it is a process, and it is because we really need to achieve this green goal, and obviously we need to do it with a huge and important participation. Because, as I said before, we are facing a huge complex system, and we have seen, for instance, now in the pandemic, but also the Green Deal objectives are very complex, and we really need this diversity and these interdisciplinary policies taken into account. It is evident that science and technology has a big part in providing the explanations and solutions that will guide us through the green transitions. I believe that very much. But also we need to study this human dimension, this social dimension of the green transition to increase our understanding of its complexity and to have everybody on board. We really need, I have written very much on that we really need economists, you were saying, we really need sociologists and psychologists which can shed light on better understanding biases of people's behavior and anticipate and analyze the expected degree of compliance of certain measures and promote sustainable energy behavior more efficiently. But we need also historians to tell us what happened in other important transitions, how society reacts, how society adapts. We need geographers. We need, of course, philosophers, in order to look to the ethic of all of that, and we really need that. And also, because if we look if we will take only engineering, only the technology, we will almost have men dealing with that. Although, if we include more sciences, we will have also women shaping this future and designing the cosmovision and the solutions to our main problems. Because as I always said, the talents are equally distributed by men, women, or other axis of inequality, but opportunities are not equally spread at all. So we have to keep that in mind and not taking things wrong. So we know that one of the most important elements included in the recovery plan presented by the European Commission is the sustainable energy transition to achieve the decarbonization of the economy. Of course, we all agree, I'm sure, this is in the right direction towards the recovery of the industry, the creation of high-quality jobs, and the European leadership in green technologies and sustainability. However, as I was saying before, these are very traditionally masculinized fields, as women represent only 32% of the workforce in renewable energy and only 15% in the oil and gas workforce, so in traditional energies. Therefore, it is necessary to incorporate, since it is not now, an inclusive perspective and to take women's input into account and to ensure that the energy systems of the future address the need of modern societies and the energy transition achieves a greater inclusion and equality. Because if we are dealing also with these differences, our socialization is normally close to societies, and even the topics we choose are more social. If we look to the difference on the specialization in science by gender, so we really need to have more women on board. Also because the different policies affect us and different groups in general in a different way. For instance, if we talk about energy access, women and men experience energy poverty in different ways. and are unequally affected by this energy poverty due to the gender indicators, well, housing conditions, care for dependent family members, age, and so on and so forth. So we really need to take that into consideration. Energy gaps, gender gaps in the energy labor market, gender gaps in energy-related education, gender gaps in decision-making at all levels in the European Union and member states. Obviously, we could take other inequality vectors or axes, but I'm just using this one because I think it will allow me to go through all the main issues I say at the very beginning. So
I think bringing the gender question, I think, is an important one. It was actually a big part of the project as well, and we can't really deal with inequalities in isolation. I don't know if you had like one more, because we also have like a few more questions coming from the chat or elsewhere, but and maybe it's something I can put to you. Like one question we had from the chat was actually on this issue on energy poverty from Dagmar Lorenz-Meyer, a researcher on solar in the Czech Republic, who was asking for specific suggestions, and like to you and the rest of the panel, on how to actually include lower income people and how to address kind of resistance to more like traditional energy utilities. I don't know if you could bridge into that.
You mean at policy level? You mean? Well, I think this is. Well, obviously there is. I mean, first of all, we need to have a good research on that. That's for sure. For that, we need good data, and so we will need better statistics, and the statistics that are just taking all the possible inequality aspects. And but one important thing, I think, the key issue here is a question of power, power balance, and now there is a great power imbalance in our societies, and energy companies hold much more power than any probably and other companies. If we could make a comparative analysis regarding different countries, member states within the European Union, we could see that having in mind how if there is more or less oligopoly in the different countries regarding electricity laws or energy laws in general, and but also social aspects, social laws, we will see a huge difference on the different countries, and as a matter of fact, different outcome. So a great research could be to make this comparison, because there we will see how power relationship works, and in those countries in which these energy companies are more powerful, also because they own newspapers, televisions, and all these sort of things, you will find more energy poverty than in other countries in which those companies has less power. So it is not only a question of the common framework for the European Union, but also to look in the different member states how are these power relations, because in some of them there are very unequal power relations, and those companies arrive to collusive agreements through oligopolies, and I think there's something we should look at. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, I just wanted to make time for a couple of minutes to go back to Vincent, who actually mentioned that there were new concrete opportunities through the LIFE program to further kind of accelerate the uptake of SSH in projects. And actually, I thought that would be an interesting point to cover, given that it goes beyond the kind of acceptance issue that we've talked at length in this panel. So Vincent, could you briefly mention give us more details on the opportunity you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, Manon, I think that's could be interesting for people, because I understand there's a lot of people following that event, and many of them are interested in funding opportunities. I think Jean-Éric Paquet mentioned Horizon Europe, and that would be a big source of funding, especially for SSH research. But one should not forget that from this year, there will be a new strand in the LIFE program for activities related to energy, and that new component of the LIFE program will have a budget of close to €1 billion, and there we will be seeking projects to help support policy implementation, to help build capacities. I think Walburga mentioned this point, which is very important, and also projects aiming to trigger large-scale investments in renewable energy, in energy efficiency improvements. And in all these projects, the actors will need to rely on the knowledge from SSH. And actually, we, as a matter of fact, are expecting proposals, project proposals, where the SSH experts are fully part of the action and are involved from the very beginning of the projects. A little bit echoing what Rosie was saying in introduction, it's important to engage the SSH community from the very beginning of the projects, and that will be also key in the LIFE program. And just to give you an example, we will be calling for projects to support cities and regions in developing and implementing ambitious long-term roadmaps, concrete climate and energy action plans. And these will use various forms of participatory processes, such as co-creation, regional living labs, etc., you name it. And for all of these approaches, it will be, of course, key to rely on the expert in behavioral science, in psychology, but also in other disciplines of SSH. I think that would be key. And we will make sure during the evaluation process that SSH experts are also involved, so that those proposals, which are multidisciplinary and involve these actors, will be looked at in a positive way.
Thanks a lot, Vincent. That's definitely an interesting opportunity. I wanted to close, basically use another question by our policy fellow, Dr. Charlotte Koet from the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate. And I think she'll share a comment and a question with us. And I wanted to ask panelists to use this as an opportunity to give a very short closing comments of like one sentence or two. But Charlotte, please give us your perspective.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to ask a question. Really enjoyed participating in the Energy Shift project. My question concerns prioritization of social sciences and social effects of climate policy. Such insights and effects, I'm referring to inequality, questions of democracy, distributions of costs, they draw increasingly more attention as we see today. However, we sometimes in practice see that they are considered secondary. And by that, I mean secondary to elements that are key in the transition, such as cost effectiveness, governability, and speed. So I'd really like to hear your perspective on this position of social sciences and social effects with regards to these other elements.
Thanks a lot, Charlotte. And as I said, I think we could actually debate this whole question in an entire panel. So I would, if at all possible, I would ask the panelists to try and give a very short comment to that. Who wants to start? Valburga, yeah, go ahead.
Maybe on cost effectiveness, but maybe Charlotte, could you just, because you mentioned three and I think I'm missing one, it was cost effectiveness and
governance and speed.
Governance and speed. On cost effectiveness, I would like to share with you that we've done a study on 2050. That was one of the first. It was basically the first study who also looked into a 100% renewable scenario, because we do think that it makes sense to also look at this scenario, and we looked at it from a cost effectiveness perspective. So where it's not just about, we want to push renewables, but where we also pose the primary question, what is the most cost effective pathway? And it showed that, looking at the whole energy system, so not just at the electricity only, but at the whole energy system with all its aspects, we would be better off pursuing a pathway of 100% renewables with a lot of energy efficiency, obviously, with a lot of storage possibilities. But that would make us better off, and we would save 6 percentage points, as if we would just go on with the fossil fuels as we see it today. So that's about cost effectiveness, and yeah, governance and speed. We don't need to lose time. At the same time, also replying to one of the questions I've seen in the chat. I mean, obviously, it's not just about deploying renewables and looking at cost energy efficiency. It's a fundamental change we're looking at in how we are producing, in how we are consuming. So it would be really far too narrow to only look at it as an energy transition. But it's a fundamental change in how we are living together, and I think that the good thing, if you would allow to also see good things in the COVID crisis we see today, is that we are fundamentally also changing things which we wouldn't have thought about changing so quickly just a few months ago. Like, for example, the way how we are working together, the way how we are using transport, and these kind of things. So I think that helps in this transition. But I fully agree, it's not just about an energy transition, it's about a much more fundamental change we need to see in how we are living.
Thanks a lot. Would our representatives from the project, Chris or Rosie, would like to comment on this too?
Sure, I can say a couple of words. I think it's a fantastic question, and certainly one that we have thought about a lot ourselves in terms of the way that perhaps energy targets are divided up. And we've heard a lot about sort of energy efficiency targets and renewables targets and so forth. But I really like the comment that was made around technology not just being a goal in and of itself, and therefore what is this actually about at the end of the day, and at the end of the day we're wanting to make society a better place, and therefore these questions around inequality and democracy are so central. And it's certainly something that we've wondered ourselves, what if energy targets were, instead of being organized around, for example, different types of energy efficiency and technologies and so forth, what if you had targets that were specifically divided by energy poverty, energy democracy, gender issues? What if the sectors were SSH sectors rather than technological sectors? You might have quite different programs. And obviously it's not to say that those things aren't trying to be embedded more and more, but whenever it's divided up by technologies, then you come across these issues of it can become secondary, trying to address these issues of inequality and so forth. So yeah, it's certainly something that we've discussed a lot as a project, and a great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, unless there's any kind of burning comments, I think this now concludes our first panel, and I really want to thank again all of the speakers and my great colleagues working in the background. I'm sorry we couldn't address all the questions in the chat, and actually if the speakers can stick around and are able to kind of continue the chatting, I think it would be an interesting exchange. I think by now we should have convinced you of the urgency to integrate social sciences and humanities in energy policy making, and we'll be back after a short break to hear about the how concretely we can go from here. The next panel will be managed by Chris and Rosie, and we'll be back at 11:35 if you're in kind of around Brussels or Paris or something. So yeah, 11:35 CET. So see you very much. See you soon, and thanks again for all our participants.